In 1788, James Madison defined rule of law in Federalist 51. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Rule of law is essential to maintaining justice and equality within a republic. As such, it is promoted in the Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Section 2, which makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land, and binds all government authorities, as well as their constituents, to their obligation to support the Constitution.
Rule of law ensures legal equality between the highest government officials and individuals, where the rights of the few are balanced against those of the many. This philosophy is promoted within the introduction of the Declaration of Independence, which asserts that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This affirms that every individual in a society is accountable under the same legal principles. In the United States, the president is held under the same restrictions as normal citizens. The government is obliged to control itself, and it does so within the impeachment and removal processes delineated in Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. This is reflected in the 1974 case of U.S. v. Nixon over the recorded conversations in the Oval Office known as the Watergate scandal.
The Magna Carta, written in 1215, was one of the first founding documents expressing the principle of rule of law. It asserted that the king was equal under the law, establishing uniformity between the barons and the nobility. The principle was reiterated in documents such as the Mayflower Compact in 1620 and the English Petition of Rights in 1628. In colonial America, the Virginia Declaration of Rights states, "All men are by nature equally free and independent." The idea of rule of law was reinforced by listing the rights and limitations written in the Constitution, further signifying America's commitment to the philosophy.
Coining a contagion of sovereignty, Harvard professor David Armitage recognizes the rule of law establishes a constancy that appeals to foreign countries. The ideal represented in the founding documents of America's history is often replicated by revolutionaries seeking justice for their own country. The Declaration of Independence states, "All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
The decree of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, echoes the Declaration in its pursuit for freedom. The global effect of the Declaration of Independence has represented the readiness of foreign countries to promote the ideas of equality under the law. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws." The simple distinction of all persons instead of citizens furthers America's commitment to rule of law, which is applicable to other countries. Once again, applying to all persons, Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights affirms that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. In Syria, where the President Bashar al-Assad has repeatedly slaughtered hundreds of his people, the rule of law is a bleak hope.
In Afghanistan, an estimated 80% of all criminal and civil disputes are resolved outside the legal system in forms called jirgas, a form of community mediation that leaves tribal customs to supersede rule of law. These forms typically fail to acknowledge individual rights and tend to exclude women from participating, undermining the rule of law. You must first enable the government to control the governed, but an inability to achieve control leads to an inability to establish rule of law. Constitutionalism and rule of law are the cornerstones that reflect our country's commitment to an orderly and civil society, in which all are bound by the rules, principles, and values of our Constitution as the supreme law of the land. Thank you.
Right
4
at-
minutes.
Right at 4 minutes. Okay. How are the Constitution and the power of judicial review an extension of the rule of law?
The judicial review extends rule of law because judicial review in the United States system is set up as a way of checking the other two branches of government. So judicial review can review laws that Congress has passed and determine if they are constitutional or not, as well as review certain actions that the president has taken to make sure that they are in line with the Constitution.
The Constitution also lays out things that are available and the rights of the people, and also limits to government, which is present and clear as day, so everyone knows what they have to follow, so there's no misinterpretation of it.
Specifically, this is mentioned in the Supremacy Clause that binds all government authorities to support the Constitution.
If and when can the rule of law be set aside?
Rule of law can be set aside when public safety deems it necessary. For example, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were interned, and the Supreme Court case Korematsu v. U.S. provided that the government should protect the public from espionage rather than value Korematsu's rights.
Okay, what role does federalism play in the rule of law?
Federalism believes in shared powers between the state government and the national government, but the national government has more power per se than the state governments do. So having the state government be able to create laws and such also allows the federal government to watch how the states are creating it, and both have to follow the rule of law.
Expanding upon Maddie's point, a philosophy or a term that is often linked with federalism is the idea that states are laboratories of democracy. So in this case, rule of law is implemented through the smaller, more regional level, that is to say states enacting localized laws, and then it is reflected by the national level. Or actually, I'm going to reverse that. So the national level puts overarching values and principles into law, into legality, and then the states on a more regionalized basis are the ones that actually are implementing these to citizens, or more directly to citizens.
Okay. Does civil disobedience promote or derogate the rule of law?
Civil disobedience promotes the rule of law because people have the right to revolution if something isn't satisfactory to them. If they don't agree with something, they have the right to say what they feel and how they don't agree with something. But also, if it gets out of hand, if they're assembling and it turns into a riot, the government officials and police officers have the right to go in and intercept and arrest those who are creating a distraction to the common public.
I believe it was Thomas Jefferson who said that the roots of the Liberty Tree must every now and then be watered by a good rebellion. It's paraphrased, but while, as my colleague Maddie pointed out, that riots to a certain extent are negative, and when violence is being initiated, this is generally a detrimental thing to rule of law. It is still important that civil disobedience, if enacted peacefully and properly, be encouraged or at least allowed in a society that is trying to perpetuate rule of law, because it is important that every citizen feel that they are able to speak their mind or stand up for their own personal rights if they feel they're being abridged.
With what Sierra said about negative civil disobedience, an example would be with Ferguson, all the riots going on there, the burning of buildings and such. It's a negative way to promote civil disobedience, so in that sense, it doesn't go along with the idea of rule of law.
I'd like you to comment on this statement, that the rule of law is not the rule of the law, but rather it's a doctrine concerning what the laws should be. How would you comment on that?
Rule of law is the political theory that is based on a morality of sorts, and so it's much more idealistic in that it's based off of time-tested values of justice and equity before the eyes of the law, whereas rule by law, which is what the converse of this is represented in contemporary dictator states today, such as North Korea, where you have despot leaders that restrict that use the laws to coerce their citizens rather than support the moral philosophy of rule of law.
An example of rule by law can be seen with Kim Jong-un and his killing of whoever doesn't agree with him or who doesn't comply to what he wishes to be done.
How much time do we have?
About 15 seconds.
Okay, we'll stop right there.
They guys would have just about had 6 questions and